Welcome, Dr. John Dunlosky, to Between Two Brains. I don't remember if you remember how we met or where we met. We met last November at the Learning in the Brain conference. And I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but I was actually supposed to be speaking at another conference that weekend. And when I saw your name on the conference speaker to that one, with all of the, basically legends and superstars to me, I canceled my appearance at a conference. I'm like, I gotta go to Boston. Gotta go meet all of these people whose work I've been translating for years. And when I caught you after your session, and I was like, I've read your work, I love what you do. And you asked me what I did. And I said, I'm a scientific instructional designer. I'm a learning designer. And your response was, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, I go, oh my God, he thinks I'm cool.
You are.
Thanks. And I think this is, where I wanted to start this narrative. And I was looking at some of your previous interviews and doing some, research and looking into all of the work that you've done. And I wanted to start off by sort of exposing and sharing with people a little bit about that process of the research. And I got a quote from a previous interview of yours that says, it takes a long time for research to trickle out to the greater public to have an impact. And this really hit home with me. For myself as a translator, sometimes I'll read a couple of your papers or some of the others, and it can take me a couple of days to really understand, how do I translate this into practical application into the work that I do? But I think where people don't see is the work that you had to do to get that drip in the pond.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the actual time and work and effort it goes into even getting these little nuggets of gold.
Well, these little nuggets of gold often start in the laboratory. So we're talking well removed from society at that point. And you come up with some good ideas. You spend years running the studies, and it could take a year or two just to get this work published. When you get kind of the endorsement of other folks in your area, and you're kind of on the right track. And some of this basic laboratory research, I think, has specific implications for what we should be doing in the wild. But even there, Lauren, I'm not so sure if anyone should take that kind of laboratory research and immediately apply it. And what I mean by that, so many things can look good in the laboratory that when they're translated into the real world, they just don't work that well. It's not because they shouldn't work, it's just that sometimes they don't. So when I'm really convinced that we should be making that move from scientific research about education and how people learn to apply to how people learn, what I'd like to see are a couple studies run in the wild to say that this intervention really works, helps people out. And that is very challenging to conduct real world research, right? To take this idea that was growing in the laboratory petri dish for years, and now let's see if it really works, if it cuts through the noise of the real world. And that itself could take several years to run, to get enough evidence where you as a scientist are convinced I should start telling the world about this, that it really can work and why it works. So, for any particular intervention, you're 10 to 15 years before you're really sure that this is going to work well. And even there, a lot of that now discussion about how exciting it is and how good it can work is really within your own scientific community, right? It hasn't leaked out yet to the presses, to folks who really want to apply it. And that's the major challenge, talking to folks like you who are excellent, who are excited to make this translation, but having something that you feel confident about, that you really sure will work if it's used with fidelity and it's used carefully in the real world. So it takes a while, and every one baby step toward that ultimate application is exciting and fun. You have to be patient.
Often at times I experiment on myself. I love experimenting on myself just to see what my changes would be. Have you done that with your research?
Yes, a lot. Actually, well, I'm pretty convinced that a lot of the implications of the research work. Like, I know they work. And I practiced with myself playing guitar.
Okay. Okay.
And it turns out it's pretty clear that when I'm making advances becoming a better guitarist, I'm using the best practices. And when I'm not making advances, I get lazy, I don't listen to my own recommendations, and I just go twiddle around versus getting focused, right? And using the kinds of skills that anybody uses to become an expert at anything, right? And these kinds of skills are basic, anyone can use them. It just sometimes they take a little bit more discipline. So yeah, I experiment on myself a lot, at least when I have the discipline and the energy to do so. Sometimes you get a little bit lazy, but of course, we're scientists. Why not start at home, right?
Yeah, and I love doing it because it's, tapping into that and then seeing how does that translate into what I'm doing, or did that completely fail? And just to go back to, I had a conversation once with a cognitive neuroscientist who was doing some research in the lab, and to your point, this is sometimes decades worth of work that people are doing. And from the world that I come from, in the organizational world, we hear people talk about projects that last, 2 weeks to a few months. And I said, oh, if you only knew that
Right.
some of the researchers and the scientists are in the lab for years, and they complete the experiment and it came with no results.
Yes. That's not uncommon, right? Well, even worse, you'll spend years just following up on something that you're sure is working.
Hmm.
And year 4 and 5, after 3 years of success, you realize, oh, it really doesn't work as well as I thought. And, it's one reason why many of us have lots of like irons in the fire, right? So you have lots of things going on, kind of following the promising path.
Hmm.
And then you kind of quickly give up on those things that don't appear to be working or put them on a back burner. Because, yeah, I mean, really to succeed in any of these businesses, you got to be ready for failure, right? And you have to work through the failure. And quite frankly, to succeed as an effective learner, you should be ready to embrace challenges and failure, right? You got to get over that
Yeah.
to succeed.
And
So
I know you and I share that same narrative of learning is not easy. It's just, I don't know when we decided that it was going that, oh, it's just so easy. I'm just going to watch this course. So I'm going to sit and it's not that easy.
well, I think at least I understand where that perception comes from sometimes, because you'll see someone else have an easy time learning something.
Hmm.
And realizes how much effort that person is putting in at home in preparing. Maybe they had a lot of background knowledge already that you didn't have. So you just see this individual excel and you're thinking, well, wow, they must be really talented. It's easy for them. Well,
Hmm.
it's easy for them. They either worked really hard to get where they're at, or they're working hard when you don't know it. Because yeah, if it's something worth learning and you really don't know a lot about it, it's going to be challenging. There's just no way around that.
No, and I often describe when I'm doing shows or I'm speaking with people, I often tell them about my journey when I started studying neuroscience in my mid 30s. And it was like going back to kindergarten. I just had nothing in there to latch onto. I had no networks or schemas, nothing to, and I wasn't a good student in science when I was younger. So even my behaviors around that going into it were like, oh God, this is going to be so hard. And it,
Well, it's so hard. And until you get that first success, it's like, oh my goodness, I succeeded. I got through this challenge. I can do it. And the question is, do I want to put that effort to get over the next challenge and then the next one and develop better ways to be more efficient at getting through those challenges? I mean, I picked up the guitar in my mid 20s, and I had lots of friends who said, maybe you should put the guitar back down. But I persisted, and now at least some friends will listen to me. But yeah, it takes a lot of effort to learn anything, right? Especially as we get older. It takes a little bit more effort.
and but to your point, and this, so what I sort of refer to as these moments of yar, and yar is the you are really ready, but yar isn't just the end game. It is those moments that happen periodically as you're learning, going, oh, I get it. Okay,
Right.
let's keep going. That triggers that motivation. It just kind of keeps you going. With guitar, I've tried to learn how to play guitar a bunch of times, and it's always, I know that my brain just goes, oh, but it's so hard to keep my hand like this. And
Oh, and it hurts.
it hurts. I'm going to give up. That's fine.
Listen to someone else play guitar. Exactly. It's about being persistent in anything that you really want. And you know, in something like guitar, it's fine to decide, hey, I really don't want that. I'd rather listen to somebody else play and move on. When it comes to the job, though, it's like, well, if you really have a challenge in front of you,
Mm.
you need to meet that to keep your job or to move up. You got to learn the best techniques to get there because, it's up to you to meet the challenges and to move beyond them.
Absolutely. And I think part of the narrative and part of what I'm advocating for is, especially in the world of adult learning, is now I look at it from a lot of different perspectives. Now, when I look at it from a neurobiological standpoint and how long it actually takes the brain to form a new memory, because I think that word is often left out of learning. It's not just learning, it's learning and memory, because if you haven't remembered anything, if you don't have that encoding, have you really learned? It's a chicken and the egg thing.
Right.
The narrative right now is rapid transformation. And I am trying my hardest to educate and to fight against this, because I think you can speak to the fact that the human process of learning isn't rapid.
No, not at all. Especially any relatively complex material, content that you need to learn that's integrated.
Mhm.
There's nothing rapid about that, right? I mean, to become an expert in a new domain or even with a new skill, it's just going to take systematic work. I mean, smaller little domains, little areas of content, you might pick that up pretty easily.
Mhm.
There are best ways to do that kind of, even easier style learning. But yeah, anything's going to be a challenge. Again, transformation that's rapid is probably not worth going after because it's just trivial, right? Learning takes time, but it does within a domain gets easier. So it takes a lot of time at first, as you know, right? When you were beginning to learn about the brain and neurophysiology, boy, those first couple steps are really hard, but it gets easier as you get more domain knowledge, right? Because you have more little hooks to link content onto as you're learning. So
Yeah.
and feel those good first successes and then just kind of catapult you forward, right?
Run with those. And that's why I do encourage people to sort of embrace those moments of what I call the moments of yar, and like, yeah, okay, let's keep going. But what I also like to share with people, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this, but for me in my world, there's a distinct difference between learning and performing.
Right.
And my narrative is that learning is longer term. Performing is short-term gain. Learning is long-term gain.
Absolutely. And, learning and performance are certainly not at all the same thing. I mean, they're highly interrelated, right?
Yeah.
The more you learn, the better you'll perform. But sometimes you could learn quite a bit and still not be able to perform, right? Because you don't know how to translate that learning into performance. And it's something we talk a lot about, like in the theoretical literature, because it's hard to really make a lot of inferences about learning sometimes, just given a particular level of performance. But one thing we do know that as you're learning and as you're performing, you'll lose, right? You learn something and you'll lose that over time, right? You'll be able to perform something well, and then you'll lose that over the time. So it's not only just thinking of learning as kind of a one-stop shopping, well, I've learned it now, so I can move on, but more like a cycle of learning, forgetting, and relearning, performing well, losing those performance skills, and then practicing again so you can perform. So it kind of all is a cyclical process of kind of learning, forgetting, learning, relearning, and so forth. And to not get frustrated because something that you did well several weeks ago, several months ago, that you can't do well now, the one promissory note I have for you is if you go back and relearn it, it's going to be easier to relearn, and you'll retain that over a longer period of time. So it's just understanding that your memory system, learning system, your performance system are just fraught with difficulties, right? You're just going to have difficulties as you move forward in learning and performing. And to understand that is to kind of taking the first step toward not being too frustrated by it. It's just natural,
And I love that because, as we're talking, and even when I'm talking to people about, I gave a talk yesterday, and now there's a slide that's very close to the beginning of my presentation that says, so what are you going to learn with me in an hour? And it says nothing in big full letters. And I look at, just like you, we can smile and we laugh because we're like, yeah, learning's hard. It's like, okay, it's going to fine. But it's, let's not sugarcoat it, because I think that when we don't really sort of come face to face with that human process, we get a lot of illusion. And
Exactly.
we think that learning happened, but then, in the organizational world, you lose a lot of time, because then you find employees who are YouTubing and Googling and, trying to just get those quick fixes without actually knowing, did I learn? Did I not learn?
Well, even worse, you go to the YouTube, you get the quick fix, which there's nothing wrong with that, to kind of brush up. But sometimes get the quick fix where you're experiencing the YouTube to kind of train you a little skill or to fill you in on something. At the moment you're watching it, it's like you get the sense, oh yeah, I get it, I understand it. So unfortunately, sometimes your system is telling you you're understanding this, you know it, you've learned it in the moment, when in fact you really need to do a lot more work to know it well. So we get all these little, what are called metacognitions, when your mind is telling you know something in the moment because you're experiencing it, it makes a lot of sense. But what your mind is not also reminding you is that, well, yeah, you know it now, you kind of understand it now, but in a matter of a day, you'll have forgotten most of it, right? You forget what you learned and you'll have to go back and relearn it. So what appears to be a quick fix is actually a quick boost in probably illusory confidence.
Yeah.
That next day when you need to perform and say in front of a boss or in front of other, other coworkers, it's like, oh my goodness, I felt like yesterday, but since I'm hoping the quick fix works, I've now lost it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's common in education. I'm sure it's common in a variety of different workplace situations as well.
How it couldn't be when, and there's people, I stand on the shoulder of giants, like yourself, who have been doing this for so long. But realistically, when we look at this, and there's a gentleman who I've worked with before, he's been doing this for about 20 years in the research. And I listened to something that he was doing the other day, and he's sharing the same stories that I'm sharing 20 years later, which is we've had 120 years of the same educational system. And we have taken it from the same methodologies and the behaviors and the skills, and we just grew up. I can't remember anything from high school or university except for the really great parties and the experiences, but the knowledge, I struggled to.
Absolutely. In fact, well, we can go on and on about
On and on, yeah.
We should probably recreate the school system to really help folks retain that kind of knowledge. I tell students I teach a cognitive psychology course to undergraduates at Kent State, and I tell them, it's like, look, you probably don't realize this yet, but 10 years from now, you're probably not going to remember anything from my class. I know it hurts me to say that, but the one thing I want you to remember is I'm going to teach you how to learn.
Yes. Oh, I'm so happy you said that.
You can hold on to that. So when you leave Kent State and you run across, say, a new challenge at work, you can at least go back. Just remember that I told you how to learn, and I'm going to teach you how to learn, and come back to your notes and revisit it. Mm-hmm. And use this because it's going to help you, right? Catapult your experience and your ability in that new profession. But yeah, we forget a lot of things from college. I relay that same kind of story to other teachers, right? Mm-hmm. Instructors who went through college. And before I kind of relay that story, I just ask them, how much do you remember from college?
Right.
It's for some of them, it's like a revelation. It's like, oh my goodness, I remember almost nothing, yet I'm a college professor.
Yeah.
So my role here, what am I trying to do really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I had that moment myself. And this was, I think it was about 15 years or so, just before neuroscience hit me. And 15 years, I started off in academia in the classroom, and I transferred over into organizational. And that there was just that one question that hit me, which is, did anyone ever teach you how to learn? And I was like, oh no, they didn't. Well, how do I know that I'm designing learning that's going to help other people then learn?
Absolutely.
And that one question that I've now asked globally, which is a really interesting social experiment, because it didn't matter which country I was in or, you know, what the culture was, because of the educational system being very similar, it was, you know, thousands of people going, oh no, no one ever taught us how to do that. And then you know, your narrative of the skills, the skills, the skills. So let's go there, because a lot of the skills that I'm now working on come from your research in metacognition. And, you know, you say metacognition and people go, you know, what does that mean? And then you can go, well, it means thinking about thinking. And then they sit there and go, what? And for me, metacognition in the world as a learning designer and as a teacher means it's becoming the audience to your own performance.
I love that, kind of the monitoring, right?
That,
Evaluate how your performance is, how can I improve it, what do I do? I do like that spin on metacognition. I also just like knowing how your mind works is another kind of definition of metacognition. And unfortunately, some of us have such, and many students I interact with have such misconceptions of how the mind works, kind of leads them down bad learning pathways, right? Like thinking the mind is almost like a video camera, right? Yeah. So it's either you're going to remember it because you're videotaping it, or you're just going to forget it as if it was been erased.
Yeah.
People don't realize, well, you're going to forget a lot of stuff, but some things you'll misremember. So it's as if it wasn't erased, but now something invalid is there. So all these little misconceptions we have the mind that kind of leads us away from using the best practices to learn. So yeah, I think that's all wrapped up in what metacognition is. Not only evaluating your performance, but also knowing how to improve your performance is part of it.
So, and I would love let's dive a little bit deeper into this, because for me, you know, metacognition, there's skills that we need to learn. We need to learn the skills of metacognition. And this is something that I preach. But then it occurred to me that even to dive into metacognition, there are skills you need before that come before that. And for me, that was focus and attention.
Yep.
Again, things that we were never taught. You know, yesterday I'm talking to a bunch of people going, okay, so we all grew up in a household or in the classroom. Someone at some point said to you, pay attention, aren't you listening? And we're like, yeah, okay. But, you know, I would love, you know, I've got a 4-year-old niece and a 6-year-old nephew, and I would love to sort of coach my nephew to go in, you know, when we're allowed back into classrooms, and say, the next time your teacher comes up to you and says, you know, pay attention, I want you to look at her and go, how do you focus?
Right. How am I supposed to pay attention?
Do that, exactly. Because without those skills, how are we supposed to be metacognitively aware?
Well, right. I mean, to some degree, I mean, we probably all had this experience where, like, just take a simple example where you're just reading at night. You're reading a fun book, studying something difficult. I'm not really have that challenge of learning calculus, just reading something fun. And 10 minutes go by and you realize the last 10 minutes you've been mind wandering.
Yeah.
You should pay attention. Well, just took you a while to figure out that you really weren't on task, right? And you need that kind of skill, is kind of being aware of your performance, right? That I'm really not performing well. And a couple things. First is, I wish I could tell you how to train attention. I know some scientists will be happy to sell you their goods to try to train attention. And I really suspect. However, one thing we do talk to students a lot, there's a little technique that if you're concerned about, geez, I'm really never seem to be on task. Like I try to get something done, and all of a sudden, way down the road, I'm just finding myself doing something else. I think it's called the Pomodoro technique.
Yeah.
It comes from tomato. And I use it a lot because I don't attend so well. And I use it because I find sometimes when I'm writing, something that professional scientists do a lot, they have to stay on task writing. And I'll find myself not writing. Well, what am I doing? Well, pre-pandemic, what I was doing was bothering my colleagues, right? I would get up from my desk and all of a sudden when I should be writing, I'm chit-chatting and so forth. But all you do, and I have all of my young student writers do this, you set a little clock or a timer right beside your computer. You set 15 minutes, okay? And hopefully at the end of the 15 minutes, it'll ring and you're writing or doing whatever you want. But if it doesn't, right, when it goes off and you're not writing, you're chit-chatting, you're doing email, you're not on task, you set it again for 10 minutes. With the hope is that when it goes off again, well, you'll scold yourself, right? Oh, I wanted to be focused and I'm not. And you set it for 10 minutes and you play the same game, right? The good news is after a while, it's like, it rings at 15 minutes and you're focused, you're doing what you should be. Well, now you set it for 20 minutes.
Right.
Okay. And at some point, it'll ring and you'll be annoyed by it because you are actually trained yourself to be attending. And then that's when you get rid of that, right? That little timer. For myself, I go in and out of my writing focus. So I find myself bringing that back to play quite a bit. So after a couple months of really good writing, if I can't stay focused, I use that technique. And I recommend students use the same thing when they're studying because, come on, for a 2-hour study session or something like that, it's easy to lose attention. It's like your little friend. It's like an external monitor to tell you every 15 minutes, like a teacher, are you paying attention? If not, pay attention. I recommend it. It works for me, and I bet you it'll work for a lot of other people too. But.
It most certainly does. I mean, that technique has been around for decades now.
Yeah.
It obviously it's proven itself in its research. For when I'm talking about that, there's a brilliant woman by the name of Kitty Chisholm who was more on the behavioral sciences, and she had a quote from a talk of hers that said, "Attention is the mechanism through which the brain focuses its resources."
Right.
Gosh, that's just so brilliant. But the first time I heard it, I was like, rewind. I'm like, what did you just say? I'm like, wait, attention is the mech. And I'm like, oh, and that's really become a very strong narrative of mine, which is, so if attention is the mechanism through which the brain is focusing, where's your attention? How many different things are you giving your attention to? But then how do we train the brain then to focus? And I think that is the bigger challenge of, it doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or if you're 50, 60 years old, that's still a challenge for most of us. And I know that, meditation practice has been a massive, massive challenge for some, for myself as well. But after 4 years of getting into it, I now see those crazy benefits of being able to do that. Teachers in classrooms are doing a technique called 50 snaps. And I love it. I'm not sure if you've seen this before.
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, let's do it. It's fun.
Okay.
So as long as you can snap. If you can't snap, you can pat, you can tap, you can do whatever you want.
I'll snap with you.
On the count of 3, all you're going to do is you're going to start snapping, but in your head, you're going to start counting to 50.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Okay, go ahead and stop.
I think I made it to 50, didn't I?
Well, what were you thinking about while you were doing it?
Well, of course, I'm just trying to think 1, 2, 3, 4, just like meditation, right? But your mind wanders and you try to come back.
Yeah.
And at about 12, I'm wondering, am I really on 12 or did I, right?
But that's just the cool part about that is most people, their resources are then going into that one task of like, well, I wasn't doing it, I was counting. I'm like, oh, so you were just putting all of your focus on that one task.
Absolutely. In fact, that's another misconception too. Do you know, we have not a lot of students, but some students think they can multitask well and do 2 things at once. I'm not sure where that misconception comes from, but if you're a student listening to this right now, don't believe yourself. Multitasking really is not the way to perform effectively unless you're trying to teach yourself to do 2 things at once because they need to be done at once. But
Right.
That's not that simple example to hark back to earlier part of the discussion, singing and playing, right, the guitar, 2 things at once. But you're really practicing one thing, right?
Yeah.
This joint skill. Otherwise, multitasking, really a good way to not to do anything effectively.
Right. And I know that, this is now starting to come into a more serious narrative because people like to brag. Oh, I'm such a great, multitasker. And I'm like, you might be a great multitasker, but what have you finished at the end of that multitasking? What have you actually completed?
Right. You're very good at doing 2 things poorly. Congratulations. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So going back to this narrative, thinking about what you're thinking about, metacognitive skills, I think that more than ever, this is exactly what, not only in the classroom setting, and I just want to pause for a moment, because I think a lot of the times when people hear researchers, academic scientists, when you refer back to students or classroom, they automatically think, oh, it's not for me, then it's for kids, it's in the classroom. No.
Mhm.
No, these are human skills. So, just because we're talking to an academic who's in a classroom, it doesn't mean that these aren't applicable to us as adults who also never learned these skills. When it comes to this, though, from your opinion, your research, and your perspective, is where do we even start as adults? Where do we even start? We know that there is a lot of pressure for a lot of people to learn in organizations these days. There's a lot of training that goes on, employee training, onboarding, all of the things. How do we start to give them these skills, or even just introduce these skills in a way that they can really kind of understand, ooh, maybe this is actually quite valuable to me?
Well, first, to begin with, much of my early research, I was a gerontologist, so I worked with folks in their 50s, 60s, 70s, a little bit younger, to evaluate the degree to which they are capable of utilizing these skills to learn more effectively, to, quite frankly, perform at a level that was equal to their younger cohort.
Mm.
Let me tell you, anyone out there that's in their 40s, 50s, 60s, you're fine. All of these skills are intact. You can take advantage of them. You can excel using them. Even there, a lot of my current research are with individuals with different disabilities. And they too, like individuals with ADHD, attentional disorders, can all use these skills, many of them relatively simple to use. They just have to be used with fidelity and tenaciously, right? Because some of the skills have the side effect of showing you that you're not there yet.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the frustration. Oh, I'm not getting there. Well, I might not be getting there because I'm not good enough, or I'm too old, or I just don't have the ability. No, everyone, right? We've already established this. It's going to take you time to reach your learning goals, right? And so the best kind of skills to use are the ones that are showing you you're not there yet, but just keep at it and you'll finally get there. So the good news is learners of all ages can use these. And the better news is that older learners, right, 20s, 30s, and beyond, at least have a good sense about what they want to learn. So you join a new business and you need to learn this content. It's part of your charge, right? That you have to learn it quickly with fidelity. And so at least you have the one up, why you're there. Why you need to learn it. Come on. When you're in college, and I get this now and I totally understand it. It's like, well, why do I need to learn this? It's like, sometimes as a teacher, it's like, I want to be able to answer that, right? To be able to tell them why. You don't even have to ask that, right? When you join a new organization, why you have to learn. Yeah. So that obstacle is out of the way. And then it's just tenaciously applying the right strategies for the right task to excel, right? But the good news is, any folks who are just starting out, it doesn't matter what age you are, I'm convinced you can master anything.
As am I. We know that, the endless amounts of research going on, even as we speak, on memory and coding. It's so phenomenal. There's I can't remember who's the group that's doing it, but someone had postulated that that the human brain could potentially hold the entire internet. And when you think about that, right. We have the memory capacity.
Yeah, you have a lot of room in there to wedge more into it, so to speak. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're not going to turn into those, big-headed alien brained, it can all just rearrange in there and start re-networking. But our capacity, and I think when I hear people say, well, I just don't have a good memory, I can't, I'm like, well, first rule, it's like Fight Club, first rule of learning, what are you saying to yourself? Because whatever you're saying to yourself is what your brain's believing. So if you're going around saying, oh, I can't remember people's names.
Right.
And you can't. Well,
and believe me, I've said those kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
But really what I was saying was, I don't want to learn those people's names.
Yeah. That was...
one of my, something I'm uninterested in is money. I don't like to do finances.
Mm.
And I just tell people I'm bad at finances. Well, I'm not bad at it. I just don't care to learn how to do it, right? So, and it's just about what we want to do. But no one don't get me wrong, there are some folks with physiological damage, and they actually do have bad memories.
Absolutely.
And the inability to learn, right, and retain content. But that's very uncommon. If you think you have a bad memory, you probably don't. My guess is you've just used very bad memory strategies, had difficulties learning because of that.
Yeah.
And because you weren't using really good skills to learn, you just kind of developed a, misperception about yourself. But everybody has even older adults in their 70s, 80s can learn a great deal, right?
Oh.
No one, really has a bad memory, so to speak.
I saw a 91-year-old grandmother swing dancing the other day. So yeah.
It kind of makes my hips hurt thinking about it.
And I feel very lazy because of it. So it's interesting. So, when it comes to what I believe are the skills that we need to be starting to teach from a very younger age, but even, to adapt and to learn these as adults as well. Just because we didn't learn it before, it doesn't mean we can't learn it now. But these skills of being able to monitor our own learning and performance, being able to pivot, and to recognize, part of the narrative of a talk I was giving the other evening was, sure, these are skills that we can use to pivot when we're learning, and they're very important during a learning process, because a lot of the times people will get to the end of their learning and then be like, I don't really know what I did. When we have the opportunities to use these skills during the process to make quick pivots, or to find the people or the resources or the feedback that we need in order to move forward more productively, as opposed to get to the end and, too late.
Absolutely. And I think for anyone listening to this, your first goal is to figure out, what is your learning objective? What you want to do with what you want to learn. Yeah. And it should really be your mantra for your self-evaluation. Am I there yet? So if I want to do a particular skill at work, if I want to remember, say, lots of content at work that I need to pull out from memory, well, you should be studying those kinds of skills or content in an effective way. But then you should be testing yourself in a manner that you're going to be tested at work, right? In other words, simulate what you're going to be doing at work to make sure you've been there. And again, the difficulty with simulation is you're going to find out, oh, geez, I thought I learned it all, and I thought I was ready, but I'm not. Yeah. And again, that's frustrating, but it also should be an epiphany. I'm not there yet. I need to work a bit more. And you know what? When I finally get to a context where I need to use this, well, I know I'm going to know it because I've shown myself I can use it. Quite frankly, in any situation where there might be an emergency where people may get anxious, the best way that's done is like you overlearn content so well, so in the heat of the moment, you won't forget.
Yeah.
That kind of anxiety is very difficult to simulate, but yet you should still simulate the skills that you need to perform, right? And make sure you can do it well. And again, the only way to do that is give yourself a lot of time, or times you can, to practice, so that when you fail, right, in either performing or remembering, you have a chance to correct. Because again, really all of expertise, behavior, and skill is learning, forgetting, relearning, until you hit a state where it's like, no, I can just use it and I'm going to retain it for the long term, right? We see experts and we think they just must be talented. That's why they're there. And they put blood, sweat, and tears into getting themselves to that level, right, of expertise. So anyway, get there. It's just, you want to spend the time and embrace it and, monitor yourself on the way to success.
That's something so incredibly important. And this is something that I think that, that I learned through my process of learning and through all the research, is the importance. And that's why I've sort of given myself the title of a scientific learning designer, because it is about choosing the right methodology at the right time. It's this moving puzzle of about, if we're talking about retrieval practice, if we're talking about interleaving, and
Right.
we won't have time to get into all of these today, but most people will just take a methodology and just dump it in without giving it very, intentional thought as to
Right.
why am I using this? Why am I using this at this time? And I think that's a big part of the narrative is if you don't know how to use these things intentionally,
Right.
you're probably not using them correctly.
Yeah, and you certainly could be trained to use them correctly, right? Because these skills are not that difficult. But getting advice and input from someone who's been there and done that and understand the application could really get you further along the way. And if you're someone who's out there seeking advice, well, how do I learn this content, right?
Yeah.
My one recommendation, and this is an anti-recommendation really, is when you're looking for the right skills, behaviors, and someone says, I can show you how to do that, and I can show you how to do it, and it's going to be easy. Go somewhere else, okay? And usually they'll say, look, I just memorized all the names of the thousands of people I just met. And they did, and you could watch them do it. But how they got there was not easy.
Right.
People are using extremely complicated strategies that they spent hours and hours and hours to master.
Yeah.
It's easy for them, right? But they're just trying to sell you something, because anyone that tells me learning is easy, I just know they're selling me snake oil and not really, right? Give me the real goods. No, tell me how I really get there, right?
And that I'm so thrilled that you brought that up. Is there is this selling factor that has come into learning when learning became a business.
Yeah.
And started to get further and further away from the human process of it, because we were so focused on the fact that it's become a multi-billion-dollar business in industry. And I'm so happy that you brought that up, because I think that we have to educate how to even ask questions about learning and about what you're selling us and all these methodologies. It was scary for me to watch during this time. I'm not sure when this is going to get released. We're still in COVID, people. Right. It was scary for me to watch this mass amount of spending happening at the university levels on technological systems that I looked, and we're talking millions of dollars from universities all across the US. And what did they do? They bought these systems only to take exactly what they had done in the classroom and just throw it right into the system. I said, well, that's not going to work.
No, you need to adapt for the new context. Absolutely.
Yeah, but it falls into the same narrative is, whether we're talking about a learning methodology, if we're talking about a system, a tool of learning, a resource, are you using it at the right time, at the right place, for the right purpose? And, because going back to our original discussion of the rapid, well, you're going to get when we get to the end of that race and you find that you cross the finish line with no skills or behavioral changes, you might want to start thinking about that before it's too late.
Absolutely.
So, just as we wrap up a little bit, I need to know, so that when we met, I had been reading your research for years. I was a huge fan. I'm just a big nerd at heart. I love staying connected to the scientific community. Who are you sort of Star Trek by in their research? Who would you say, oh my God, I'm so excited about this person's research?
Wow. Unfortunately, when I was younger, I wanted to be a historian. So a lot of my starstruck are with folks who really aren't in the game anymore.
Okay.
It's kind of more a level of just incredible respect and just being inspired by folks' work. So one of my favorites is Harry Barrick, who really developed some of the models for how to evaluate why experts and expertise develops.
Yeah.
Beautiful work showing that, guess what? Experts have to work hard to get there.
Yeah.
To me, that was an absolute inspiration to read his research, because he showed that not only can we get at really important questions like how are experts born, but we can get at these big issues, right? that you can't really attack with experiments.
Right.
Get at them scientifically to understand like what it takes to become an expert. And guess what? The answer, a lot of hard work across time, so to speak. So I put Harry Barrick way up there. Some contemporaries, I just, follow lots of people's work because, quite often we get inspired to do new research or follow new exciting lines by looking at other people's work. And of course, Roddy Roediger comes to mind, who's really pushed education psychology and cognitive psychology. Mark McDaniel comes to mind, Janet Metcalf, folks who've been just doing great metacognitive research, really good basic work, but who's also been really interested in applying their work to education. So, I have got my eye on all of these individuals, plus a lot of new young researchers who are just so exciting to into the game and start swinging the bat. And I'm not going to name any of them now because if I miss somebody, I'm sure there's just a lot of really.
We'll get you on social.
Just lots of really good work going on.
Well, I have to say, it's always such a delight for me to be able to connect with academics, researchers like yourself. It keeps me connected as the translator. Who it's such an honor to be one of these people who get to dive into your research and to expose you to the rest of the world, because like people need to know this isn't a 3-month project. These are years of dedication in the labs with hundreds, if not thousands of brains going through experimentation so that we can get these drips in the pond to then share to really better ourselves as not only learners, but as humans. So I can't thank you enough for giving me some of your time today.
Well, it's my pleasure. And let's just fill that pond together, right? Lots of drips, we'll overflow it.
I really appreciate it, John. Thanks for coming
my
on.
Pleasure.
Your brains.